respond, "The Lord is risen indeed, alleluia." Alleluia, Christ is risen.
The Lord is risen indeed, alleluia.
Please be seated. It's nice to have all of you here with us today, and it looks like just about everybody found a seat, so that's a great thing. It reminds me of the Easters of my growing up, when my father would be in the kitchen waiting for my mother to get us all ready, and so we'd all be rushing downstairs, and he'd be saying, "Hurry, we have to get to church to find a seat." And it reminds me of a story. So there was this guy who was lonely, and he decided that he needed a pet. And so he went to the pet store and talked with the pet owner, and he told the pet owner, "I don't want just any pet. I want it to be a little bit unusual." So they talked about it, and finally the pet store owner sold him a centipede. So he had this little centipede, and he gave him a box to live in. And so happy, the lonely guy went home, and he put his centipede in the box in a special place. So it got near the end of the week, and Easter was, he woke up on Easter morning, and he thought, I'd really like to take my centipede to church with me. I wonder how this is going to go. So he went over to the box, and he said, "Hey, would you like to go to church? It's Easter Sunday." And he didn't hear anything. He was a little disappointed because part of the point of getting a pet was to have a companion to do some things with, right? So he decided he would try a different approach, and so he tried again in a kind of happy way. He said, "You wouldn't believe what it's like in church. The people are really nice, the flowers are beautiful, the music is great. How about come to church with us?" Didn't hear a thing. So then, it was getting late. And he was afraid he was going to miss his seat in church on Easter Sunday. So he decided to go one last time and give his centipede a chance. So almost yelling at this little box, he said, "Hey, you in there, I want to go to church with you. You think you could get up and come to church with me? It's Easter Sunday." And he heard this tiny little voice that said, "All right already. I heard you the first time. I'm trying to get my shoes on." For most of my ordained ministry, when it came to Easter Sunday, I had this notion that Easter was about power. God's power to overcome death. God's power to heal and to make us whole again. God's power to persevere with us and for us when we are in dark places or forlorn. And to be sure, there is an awesome power in this story of Jesus' bodily resurrection after 3 days of death, is there not? I mean, decay doesn't somehow reverse itself without a powerful shift. But this year, I have another take on Easter. This year, I have come to believe that Easter is about love. The suffering love that delivers us back to ourselves and gives us to our God. The love that meets us wherever we are in life and accepts us just as we are. The love that keeps us humble when we yearn to practice it and fail. The love that becomes power through suffering. The love we learn about when we let go and let God in and suffer with God and with each other. It is that love that resurrects Jesus and resurrects us. There was this neighbor of a 4-year-old little boy. He was an elderly gentleman who had recently lost his wife. Upon seeing the old man in his backyard weeping, this little boy was observed by his mother as he went and opened the gate between their 2 yards and went into the gentleman's yard, walked over to him, and climbed up on his lap and just sat there. After about a half an hour, he got back down, opened the gate, and came home. His mother met him down in the kitchen, and she asked the little boy what he had said to their neighbor. And the little boy replied, "Nothing. I just helped him cry." It's that kind of love that I think awakened those women early on that day after the Passover a couple of thousand years ago in Jerusalem. Awakened them so that they could go with their spices and ointments to try to gain access to the tomb where Jesus' body lay. They wanted a do-over. They wanted to retrace the steps of Jesus' burial to make it right, to make something right from that terrible sequence of events 3 days earlier, to properly anoint him. And they wanted to remember him and to begin to grieve and to take stock of their own lives, to begin to understand what had happened on that hill of Calvary as they had watched him suffer and die. They wanted to recover some semblance of dignity for him and for themselves in the midst of their devastation. These women, in their suffering, were simply doing what was necessary, putting one foot in front of the other, that his burial may be proper. And maybe then they could begin to make sense of the recent events. Maybe then they could actually cry themselves and figure out what to do next in their own lives now that Jesus was gone. So imagine their surprise when the tomb was empty. They had been wondering how they were going to roll back that stone and accomplish their task. So at first, they were very thankful that they didn't have to strain their backs or hurt themselves. But that wave of gratitude soon became alarm as the angel announced to them the reality of what they were experiencing. "Say what, angel? He's been raised?" They wanted to believe their own eyes, but they were stopped in their tracks. And so they swung from their great grief to tempered joy, and then they moved into utter confusion within a few short minutes. So instead of following the angel's directions and going to tell Peter and the others, the women fled. They ran away. They fled in terror and amazement. And the gospel story says they were afraid. You know, when Mark wrote his gospel, the early Christian community among whom he lived was in conflict. And Christians and Jews were being threatened with obliteration by the forces of Rome. The future was incredibly uncertain. Everyone's choices mattered and were costly. Believing in Jesus was dangerous. Mark's story ends with the women frightened and mute. Later, scholars added some lines to make the story more complete, more palatable. So they said, oh, well, they did go back and talk to the disciples, and oh, yeah, by the way, they went out into the world and took the gospel. But those are just add-ons. I mean, how can you get to the end of a great story of God's saving help with people running away scared? Annie Dillard writes, "God, I'm sorry I ran from you. I am still running from that knowledge, from that I, that love from which there is no refuge. For you meant only love, and I felt only fear and pain. So once in Israel, love came to us incarnate and stood in the doorway between two worlds, and we were all afraid. Are we not like those women who ran away frightened when they had the opportunity to enter a new world, when faced with the ultimate power of love to reverse even death? What are we afraid of? What are we afraid of? Are we afraid of being invited into a new and different world? Are we afraid that if we believe the story, it will simply be too costly for our lives? What are you afraid of? That your life may be different if you let love in? I think that's why the women ran away. They knew that their lives were going to change forever. The resurrection scared them. And it scares us. Does it not? Raise your hand if the resurrection scares you a little bit. Just a little? Just a little? This story of the never-failing, death-defying love of God that we live into when we follow Jesus and take up our cross, Jesus said that, those who lose their life will gain them. It's the prescription for success. But this way of success really scares us. It seems counterintuitive. It does not add up in the world we inhabit, does it? The dog-eat-dog world where you're called to protect your own turf and trust no one. You know how we are so careful with our children, grandparents, parents, and teachers alike, to be sure that they have some good experiences when they're growing up, whether in school or with their friends, or perhaps on an athletic field, or perhaps they're singers or actors, or maybe they're great artists. But we hope for our children that they'll have these good experiences because we know that life will bring to them some challenges. We know that life will bring them some hurts and some ways that they will fail. And so we want them to be able, right, to hearken back to some of those successes and to remember, oh yes, I've done this before. I can succeed. Well, I think all of us need those moments. We are in need of the reminders of success, like resurrection success. Reminders in the midst of suffering that on the third day he rises. Reminders that the light cannot be contained in a tomb or even out in the world. It just shines and reverberates and bounces off of stars and is all over the place, that the light cannot be contained. We need to remember that. Because if we remember that love prevails, then we do not need to abandon our loving, even when it is hard. For when we show love in the face of hatred or malice, envy or contempt, suspicion or indifference, we claim a powerful truth that love is the way to success. I think that somewhere deep in our bones, maybe because we've heard this story of the resurrection so many times, we know that love wins. Love changes us and changes others. So in the end, we have nothing left to do but accept God's love and then love and forgive ourselves and love and forgive others. It's the pattern of the Christian life, to accept God's love, to love and forgive ourselves and to love and forgive others. Let's say it together. Accept God's love, love and forgive ourselves, love and forgive others. It's the Christian life, to forgive and forgive and forgive. And we're called to practice it until our constancy in loving and trusting God and each other and even ourselves, until that wins over our own hearts and the hearts of others. So when we choose love, our own hearts are delivered back to God and we return to ourselves. This resurrection story ends with the women frightened, and we too are scared of a God who may love us too much and shows us the way of self-sacrificing love for others. But I think somewhere deep within us, we know that it's that kind of loving that our lives are all about. It is often as simple as climbing on someone's lap and helping them cry. And that is good news. Alleluia, Christ is risen. The Lord is